The morning sun filters through the tall, stained-glass windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Today isn't just another day in Family Court Division 3. Today marks the end of what was once a love story, now reduced to legal documents, bitter accusations, and the cold finality of a judge's gavel. Michael Harrison sits rigidly in the plaintiff's section, his navy suit pressed to perfection, his jaw clenched like a man preparing for battle. At 34, he's weathered the past 3 years of separation with the determined focus of someone who's convinced himself this is all necessary. His dark hair is meticulously styled, not a strand out of place, because today he needs to look like a man who has his life together, a man who's made the right choice. The leather chair creaks softly as he shifts his weight, fingers drumming against a mahogany table. Around him, the courthouse buzzes with the familiar sounds of justice in motion. Lawyers shuffle papers, court clerks whisper into phones, and somewhere in the distance, the echo of footsteps on marble creates a rhythm that matches his anxious heartbeat. His attorney, Jonathan Pierce, leans in close. Pierce is everything Michael wanted in a divorce lawyer, sharp, expensive, and ruthless when necessary. The man's silver hair and tailored suit speak of victories in courtrooms just like this one. "Today it ends," Pierce whispers, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who's never lost a case like this. "By noon, you'll be free to start fresh." Start fresh. The words should bring relief, but instead they settle in Michael's chest like stones. He's been telling himself this story for months now. The story of a man trapped in a barren marriage. A man who deserves better, who deserves children, who deserves a future that isn't haunted by empty nurseries and monthly disappointments that arrived as regularly as clockwork. The courtroom fills slowly, like a theater before the final act of tragedy. Michael's family occupies the first 2 rows behind him. His mother, Eleanor Harrison, sits with the posture of a woman who's never been wrong about anything in her 72 years. Her lips are pressed into a thin line of disapproval that's been her signature expression whenever Sarah's name is mentioned. Beside her, Michael's younger sister Jennifer fidgets with her purse, stealing glances toward the opposite side of the courtroom where Sarah's family will soon sit. The Harrison clan has never been subtle about their feelings. They've spent 3 years blaming Sarah for everything. The failed attempt at pregnancy, the mounting medical bills, the way their golden boy Michael seemed to lose his spark year after year. In their version of the story, she's the anchor dragging down their brilliant son, the architect who could have designed a perfect life if only he'd married someone more suitable. Across the aisle, Sarah's side of the courtroom begins to fill. Her older brother David enters first, his contractor's hand still bearing traces of yesterday's work despite the formal occasion. Behind him, Sarah's parents settle into their seats with the quiet dignity of people who've learned to weather storms without complaint. Maria Santos, Sarah's mother, keeps her rosary beads in her lap, her fingers moving in silent prayer. Her husband Roberto sits beside her, his weathered face betraying none of the anger that Michael knows must be simmering beneath the surface. The 2 families exist in separate worlds now, divided by more than just the courthouse aisle. They exchange glances that could freeze water. 3 years of resentment and accusations compressed into looks that speak volumes about blame, disappointment, and the collapse of what everyone once thought was a perfect match. Judge Catherine Reeves enters, her black robes flowing behind her like the wings of some ancient bird of justice. She's presided over hundreds of divorce cases, each one a small tragedy in its own way, but she carries herself with the authority of someone who's learned to find truth in the wreckage of broken promises. Her gray hair is pulled back severely, and her eyes hold the kind of wisdom that comes from witnessing human nature at its most vulnerable. "All rise," the bailiff announces, and the courtroom fills with the rustle of fabric and the scrape of chairs. This is it, the moment Michael has been working toward for 18 months of legal maneuvering, depositions, and negotiations. In a few hours, his marriage to Sarah will be nothing more than a signature on filed paperwork. Judge Reeves settles behind her bench, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviews the case file. "We're here today for the final divorce proceedings in the matter of Harrison versus Santos Harrison," she begins, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "This case has been—" She pauses, glancing at her notes. "Extensive in its documentation." That's one way to put it, Michael thinks. Extensive, like calling a hurricane a light breeze. The judge continues her opening remarks, outlining the day's proceedings, the division of assets that's been negotiated and renegotiated, the terms of separation that have been fought over like territory in a war. Michael half listens, his attention drifting to the empty chair at the defendant's table where Sarah should be sitting. Where is she? His lawyer had mentioned she might be late, something about traffic, but Sarah is never late. In 8 years of marriage, she was never late to anything. Dinner reservations, family gatherings, doctor's appointments, especially doctor's appointments. They'd been to so many over the years, chasing the dream of children that never came, sitting in waiting rooms filled with other couples who were the same expression of hope mixed with dread. The courthouse doors at the back of the room creak open, and Michael turns instinctively, expecting to see Sarah slip in quietly, apologetically, the way she used to enter rooms when she thought she might be interrupting something important. But the woman who walks through those doors is not the Sarah he remembers. She moves with a confidence that stops conversations mid-sentence. Her dark hair falls in waves around her shoulders, longer than she used to wear it. And there's something different about her face. A glow, a radiance that makes her look like she's carrying some secret joy that lights her up from within. And then he sees why. Sarah's belly curves outward beneath her flowing emerald dress, unmistakably, undeniably round with pregnancy. She's not just pregnant, she's significantly pregnant. The kind of pregnant that suggests this baby has been growing for months, while Michael signed papers and planned his new life. The courtroom falls silent. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for proceedings to begin, but the shocked, breath-holding silence of people who just witnessed something that changes everything they thought they knew about the story unfolding before them. Michael's world tilts on its axis. His mother's sharp intake of breath cuts through the silence like a blade. Someone's purse hits the floor with a thud that echoes like a gunshot. Judge Reeves looks up from her paperwork, her eyebrows rising as she takes in the scene. Sarah doesn't look at Michael. She doesn't glance toward his family or acknowledge the gasps and whispers that follow her down the aisle. She moves with the serene purpose of a woman who knows exactly what she's doing, who's prepared for this moment in ways that no one else in the room could have imagined. She takes her seat at the defendant's table beside her attorney, Maria Valdez, who rises briefly to help her settle into her chair. Valdez is a formidable woman in her own right, known for her fierce advocacy for women in difficult divorces, and the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth suggests she's been looking forward to this moment. Michael can't breathe. His mind races through calculations, trying to make sense of what he's seeing. When was the last time they were together? How long has it been since the separation? The timeline spins in his head like a roulette wheel, but every calculation leads to the same impossible conclusion. The baby could be his. But that's impossible. They tried for years. Years of tests and treatments and specialists who delivered increasingly grim assessments of their chances. Sarah was barren. That had been established. The word had hung over their marriage like a curse, whispered in doctors' offices and thrown like accusations during their worst fights. So how is she sitting there, radiant with pregnancy, carrying life inside her body that had been deemed incapable of sustaining it? Judge Reeves clears her throat, attempting to regain control of her courtroom. Mrs. Santos Harrison, she begins, and even her experienced composure seems slightly shaken. I wasn't aware of your condition. Sarah looks up for the first time, her voice steady and clear. Your Honor, my pregnancy doesn't change the legal matters before us today. I'm here to finalize the divorce as planned. The simplicity of her statement only amplifies the chaos it creates. Michael's sister Jennifer whispers harshly to their mother. Whose baby is that? It can't be. Eleanor Harrison's face has gone pale, but her eyes burn with fury that speaks of years of carefully constructed narratives suddenly crumbling. She spent countless family dinners explaining to relatives why Michael had to leave his wife, how some women simply weren't blessed with the ability to carry children, how her son deserved better than a barren marriage. Now Sarah sits before them, glowing with the very thing Eleanor had declared impossible. David Santos, Sarah's brother, crosses his arms and fixes the Harrison family with a look that could melt steel. He's a man who solves problems with his hands, and right now his hands are clenched into fists. The protective older brother in him has been watching his sister suffer in silence for 3 years, and this moment feels like vindication for every cruel word and pitying look she's endured. Michael's thoughts spiral into chaos. If Sarah's pregnant, really, truly pregnant, then everything he's believed about their marriage, about her, about himself, crumbles to dust. Every argument they had about children, every time he accused her of not trying hard enough, every moment he looked at her with disappointment instead of love, it all becomes something different. Something unforgivable. But there's another thought creeping in at the edges of his panic, a possibility that makes him feel sick and hopeful at the same time. If she's pregnant, and if the timing is right, then maybe this child is his. Maybe they created life together, just as their legal life together was ending. The irony would be cosmic in its cruelty. Sarah finally turns and looks at him directly. Her brown eyes hold none of the sadness or pleading he remembers from their last conversations. There's no anger there either, which somehow makes it worse. There's just distance. The look of someone who's moved so far beyond him emotionally that his shock and confusion register as nothing more than background noise. That look tells him more than any words could. Whatever this pregnancy means, wherever this baby came from, it has nothing to do with him anymore. She's not here to explain or justify or seek his approval. She's here to end what they started 8 years ago, and his feelings about her condition are as irrelevant to her now as her feelings had become to him during those final months of their marriage. Judge Reeves shuffles her papers, clearly struggling with how to proceed. In 30 years on the bench, she's seen everything. Bitter custody battles, hidden assets, affairs, fraud, and every other way humans can complicate the simple act of legally ending a relationship. But a heavily pregnant woman appearing at her own divorce proceedings without any prior mention of her condition? This is new territory. Perhaps, Judge Reeves suggests carefully, we should take a brief recess to allow all parties to adjust to this development. That won't be necessary, Your Honor, Sarah's attorney interjects smoothly. My client's prepared to proceed as scheduled. Michael wants to shout. He wants to demand answers, to ask how and when and whose. He wants to jump over the barrier and shake her until she explains how she can sit there so calmly when his entire understanding of reality has just shattered. Instead, he sits frozen, drowning in questions he doesn't even know how to ask. The weight of every person's stare presses down on him. His family's shock and accusations, Sarah's family's knowing looks, the court reporter's fingers poised over her machine waiting to record whatever comes next, the bailiff's professional attention to potential disruption, all to focus on this moment, where everything he thought he knew reveals itself to be built on sand. As Judge Reeves begins to stumble through her opening remarks, try to find her footing in proceedings that have suddenly become far more complicated than scheduled, Michael realizes that this isn't just the end of his marriage. This is the beginning of something else entirely. Something that will demand answers he's not sure he wants to hear, and truths he's not sure he can survive knowing. Sarah sits perfectly still, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other folded calmly in her lap, and in her stillness lies a power that makes the entire courtroom hold its breath. It takes hours of writing and editing to bring you stories like this. Please subscribe. It's free. Only those who don't believe in fairness and love would ignore it. If you were in his shoes, what would be the first thought running through your mind? The tension in the courtroom has shifted from the predictable discomfort of legal proceedings to something far more volatile. Michael feels like he's drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people but completely alone with the implications of what he's witnessing. Every breath seems to catch in his throat as he struggles to process the impossible image of Sarah, radiant and pregnant, sitting just 20 feet away. His motivation for this divorce had been crystal clear when he first walked into Jonathan Pierce's office 18 months ago. He wanted freedom. He wanted the chance to start over with someone new, someone who could give him the children he'd dreamed of since he was young enough to imagine his future as a father. He'd painted himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances, a good man trapped in a marriage that couldn't provide him with the family he deserved. Now, watching Sarah's hand move unconsciously to rest on her belly in a gesture so protective and maternal it takes his breath away, Michael realizes his reputation, his entire sense of self, hangs in the balance. If this baby is his, then he's not the victim of a barren marriage. He's the man who abandoned his pregnant wife. If it's not his, then the woman he married found love and fertility with someone else while he was planning his escape. Either possibility destroys the narrative he's been telling himself and everyone else. But Sarah's motivation remains a mystery that terrifies him more than any legal complication could. Why appear here today, visibly pregnant, without warning? She could have postponed the proceedings, could have handled this privately, could have spared them both this public spectacle. Instead, she chose this moment, this courtroom, this audience of family members and legal professionals to reveal what might be the most significant development in their relationship's entire history. Is this revenge? The final, devastating move in a chess game he didn't know they were playing? Or is it something else entirely? Protection for herself and her child, establishing legal and emotional distance before he can complicate whatever new life she's building? Maybe it's simply truth. Sarah had always been direct, even when directness hurt. Maybe she's here, pregnant and glowing, because this is who she is now, and she refuses to hide or apologize for it any longer. The families on both sides of the courtroom are no longer maintaining even the pretense of civility. Michael's mother has leaned forward in her seat, her whispered comments to his sister growing more agitated with each passing minute. He can't hear the exact words, but he knows Eleanor Harrison well enough to imagine them. She's building a defense, crafting explanations, preparing to protect her son's reputation, even as the evidence of her miscalculation sits before them all. "That child cannot be Michael's," she whispers harshly to Jennifer, her voice carrying further than she intends in the acoustics of the high-ceilinged courtroom. "We all know what the doctor said. She's been with someone else." The words hit Michael like physical blows. His mother's certainty, her willingness to assume the worst about Sarah even in the face of possibilities she doesn't want to consider, makes him see his own behavior reflected in harsh relief. How many times had he made similar assumptions? How many times had he looked at Sarah with blame instead of compassion, accusation instead of partnership? Across the aisle, Sarah's family radiates a different kind of energy entirely. Her brother David has turned his seat to face the Harrisons directly, his jaw set in a way that suggests years of swallowed anger finally finding focus. Maria Santos continues her quiet prayers, but there's steel in her posture now, the strength of a mother watching her daughter navigate waters that should have been calm but have turned treacherous through no fault of her own. Roberto Santos sits with the stillness of a man who spent his life in physical labor, who understands that sometimes the most powerful response to chaos is simply to remain solid, unmovable, present. His eyes never leave his daughter, and the love and support radiating from him creates a protective barrier that makes Michael realize how isolated Sarah must have felt during the worst months of their marriage. The courtroom has become a battlefield where every glance is a weapon, every whisper an attack or defense, every gesture loaded with meaning that goes far beyond the legal dissolution of a marriage. Judge Reeves attempts to restore order, but she's clearly struggling with the emotional undercurrents that threaten to sweep her carefully structured proceedings into chaos. "Let's focus on the matters at hand," she says firmly, but her voice lacks its earlier authority. Even she seems to recognize that the matters at hand have suddenly expanded far beyond asset division and custody agreements that don't exist. Michael's lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, leans in close again, his expensive cologne failing to mask the tension radiating from him. This isn't the clean, simple divorce he'd promised. This is the kind of case that generates headlines, that makes lawyers' reputations or destroys them, that turns courtrooms into theaters for human drama that no amount of legal training can fully prepare you to manage. "We need to know about paternity," Pierce whispers urgently. "If that child is yours, everything changes. Property division, support obligations, custody considerations. Everything we've negotiated goes out the window." The words hit Michael like ice water. Paternity, the question that hangs over the room like smoke from a fire no one wants to acknowledge. In all his shock and confusion, he hasn't fully grasped the legal implications of Sarah's pregnancy. If this child is his, then his carefully planned exit from their marriage becomes something else entirely, abandonment of a pregnant wife and unborn child. But the emotional implications run even deeper than the legal ones. Michael finds himself caught in a riptide of memories he spent 3 years trying to suppress. The early days of their marriage, when they talked about children with the casual confidence of young people who assume the future will unfold according to their plans. The first months of trying that felt more like playing than work, filled with excitement and anticipation. Then the creeping awareness that things weren't happening as expected. The first doctor's appointment that was supposed to be routine but led to more appointments, more tests, more questions with increasingly complex answers. The specialist who spoke in percentages and statistics, who offered treatments with success rates that seemed to shrink with each consultation. Michael remembers the way Sarah's face changed over those months. The hope gradually replaced by determination, then by quiet desperation, and finally by a resigned sadness that she carried like a physical weight. He remembers his own frustration, his growing resentment at a situation that seemed to have no solution, no clear cause, no one to blame except the wife who couldn't give him what he wanted most. The memory that haunts him most is from 18 months ago, during one of their final fights. Sarah had just returned from another doctor's appointment, another round of tests that promised nothing and delivered less. She sat at their kitchen table, still wearing her medical bracelet from the blood draw, and told him in a voice barely above a whisper that maybe they should consider adoption. "I don't want someone else's child," he'd said, the words coming out harsher than he'd intended. "I want our child. I want a family that's actually ours." The look on her face in that moment, the way she seemed to physically shrink, the way her hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen as if protecting something that would never be there, should have been his wake-up call. Instead, it had been the beginning of the end, the moment when he started building the wall between them that would eventually become their divorce decree. Now she sits 20 feet away, carrying life inside her body that had been declared incapable of sustaining it, and Michael can't escape the possibility that everything, every assumption, every accusation, every moment of blame and resentment had been built on lies. But whose lies? The doctor's who declared her barren? His own desperate need to find someone to blame for their shared disappointment? Or something else entirely, some truth he'd been too proud or too blind to see. The courtroom proceedings continue around him, but Michael feels like he's underwater, watching events unfold through a distorted lens that makes everything surreal and distant. Judge Reeves is discussing property division, the house they bought together in those optimistic early days, the savings accounts they built for a future that included children's college funds and family vacations. All of it seems meaningless now, beside the point, irrelevant to the real questions that demand answers. Who is the father of Sarah's child? When did she conceive? Why didn't she tell him? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for everything he thought he knew about himself, his marriage, and the choices that led him to this courtroom? Sarah's attorney, Maria Valdez, presents her position with professional competence, but there's something in her manner that suggests she's operating from a position of strength that goes beyond legal preparation. She speaks about her client's rights and interests with the confidence of someone who knows she holds cards that haven't been revealed yet, who's prepared for responses to questions that haven't even been asked. Mrs. Santos Harrison has been fully cooperative throughout these proceedings. Valdez states clearly she's prepared to finalize all aspects of the divorce as previously negotiated, with appropriate modifications for changed circumstances. Changed circumstances. The euphemism hangs in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the courtroom knows what those changed circumstances are, but no one seemed prepared to address them directly. Michael watches Sarah's face as her lawyer speaks, searching for any clue about her thoughts, her plans, her feelings about the chaos her appearance has created. But Sarah has developed a poker face that reveals nothing, a composure that seems almost inhuman in its completeness. This is not the woman he married. That Sarah had been open, emotional, quick to laugh and quicker to forgive. She'd worn her heart on her sleeve and trusted him with her deepest fears and highest hopes. The woman sitting across the courtroom is someone else entirely. Someone who's learned to protect herself in ways that the young woman who'd said yes to his proposal had never needed to know. The transformation should make him sad, but instead it fills him with something closer to fear. If Sarah has changed this much, become this much stronger and more independent, then he never really knew her at all. And if he never really knew her, then how can he predict what she'll do next? The morning stretches toward noon, each minute weighted with tension that seems to build rather than resolve. Michael realizes that this courtroom drama is just the beginning, not the end. Whatever happens today, whatever is decided about property and assets and legal obligations, the real story is just starting to unfold. And for the first time since he walked into Jonathan Pierce's office seeking freedom from a marriage he thought was holding him back, Michael begins to understand that he might not be the protagonist of this story after all. Do you think her pregnancy is a miracle, or is there more to her story? The judge calls for a 30-minute recess, and the courtroom erupts into a symphony of whispered conversations, scraping chairs, and the rustle of people who can no longer sit still with the weight of what they witnessed. The formal structure of legal proceedings has been shattered by Sarah's revelation, and now everyone scrambles to make sense of the pieces. Michael watches Sarah rise from her chair with fluid grace, one hand supporting her lower back in a universal gesture of pregnant women everywhere. The simple, unconscious movement hits him like a physical blow because it's so familiar, so naturally maternal, so completely at odds with everything he convinced himself to believe about her body's capabilities. She moves toward the courtroom side exit, presumably toward the restrooms, and Michael sees his chance. His legs feel unsteady as he stands, adrenaline and shock making his movements jerky and uncertain. He needs answers. He needs to understand how the woman he blamed for their childless marriage is now carrying a child that could rewrite the entire story of their relationship. Sarah. His voice cracks slightly as he calls her name in the courthouse corridor. She stops but doesn't turn around immediately. When she does face him, her expression is carefully neutral, the kind of diplomatic blankness that people use when they're prepared for a confrontation but determined not to escalate it. Michael. Her voice is steady, devoid of the warmth he remembers and the anger he'd expected. They stand in the marble hallway, surrounded by the echoes of other people's legal dramas, other families navigating the wreckage of broken relationships. The institutional lighting is harsh and unforgiving, but somehow it makes Sarah's pregnancy glow seem even more pronounced, as if she's carrying her own source of light. "We need to talk," he says, the words tumbling out faster than he intended. About what this means. Sarah's hand moves to her belly again, that protective gesture he's beginning to recognize as her new normal. The court isn't the place for this conversation, Michael. Then where? You can't just walk into our divorce proceedings looking like this and expect me not to have questions. For the first time since she entered the courtroom, Sarah's composure cracks slightly. There's a flash of something. Pain? Anger? Disappointment? That crosses her face before she regains control. I can't. Her voice is quiet, but there's steel underneath it. After 3 years of separation, 18 months of divorce proceedings, and countless opportunities for you to ask how I was doing, now you think you're entitled to explanations? The words hit him like a slap. Michael realizes that in all the legal maneuvering, all the negotiations over property and assets, he's never once asked Sarah how she was coping with the end of their marriage. He'd been so focused on his own freedom, his own future, his own narrative of victimhood that he'd never considered she might be building a life that had nothing to do with him anymore. Is it mine? The question comes out as barely a whisper, but it hangs between them like a live wire. Sarah looks at him for a long moment, and in her eyes he sees the ghost of the woman who used to love him, who used to trust him with her deepest fears and wildest hopes. But that ghost is overlaid with something harder now, something that's learned to survive without his approval or understanding. That's not the question you should be asking, she says finally. What do you mean? Of course it's the question I should be asking. If you're pregnant with my child. The question you should be asking, Sarah interrupts, her voice gaining strength, is why you never asked before. Why? In 8 years of marriage, you never questioned whether the doctors were right. Why you were so quick to believe that I was broken instead of wondering if maybe, just maybe, the problem was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. Michael feels the ground shifting beneath his feet. There's something in her tone, in the way she's looking at him, that suggests she knows something he doesn't. Something that changes everything. What are you saying? But Sarah's already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor with finality that makes it clear the conversation is over. I'm saying that the truth has a way of coming out, Michael, whether we're ready for it or not. He stands alone in the corridor, watching her disappear around the corner, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Michael allows himself to consider a possibility that makes him feel sick with dread and desperate hope in equal measure. What if Sarah was never the problem? Back in the courtroom, the families have arranged themselves into opposing camps that barely maintain the pretense of civility. Michael's return to his seat is met with urgent whispers from his mother and sister, both of whom have clearly spent the recess building elaborate theories about Sarah's pregnancy that conveniently absolve Michael of any responsibility or poor judgment. Did she tell you who the father is? Eleanor Harrison demands in a stage whisper that carries across the aisle. Michael can't bring himself to answer. Instead, he finds his attention drawn to a man he doesn't recognize sitting in the back row on Sarah's side of the courtroom. The stranger is well-dressed, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggests professional success. He's watching proceedings with the intensity of someone personally invested in the outcome, and when Sarah returns from the hallway, he catches her eye and nods slightly. The gesture is subtle, supportive, intimate in a way that makes Michael's chest tighten with a jealousy he has no right to feel. Is this the father of Sarah's child? The man who succeeded where Michael had failed, who gave her the family she'd always wanted. The thought should bring clarity, should make the situation simpler to understand. But instead, it opens new wounds. If Sarah found love and fertility with someone else, then she was capable of both all along. The problem hadn't been her body or her inability to conceive. The problem had been their marriage, their stress, their increasingly toxic dynamic around the question of children. Or worse, the problem had been him. Judge Reeves returns to the bench, and the formal proceedings resume, but the atmosphere has fundamentally changed. What began as a routine divorce has become something else entirely, a public examination of a marriage that failed in ways none of them fully understood at the time. The lawyers continue their careful dance around property division and asset allocation, but everyone in the room knows these technical matters are secondary now. The real drama lies in the questions that haven't been asked and the truths that haven't been revealed. Michael watches Sarah throughout the afternoon session, studying her face for clues about her thoughts, her plans, her feelings about the chaos her appearance has created. But she remains inscrutable, responding to legal questions with calm precision, while revealing nothing about the personal storm swirling around her pregnancy. As the hours pass, Michael becomes increasingly aware that he's not just losing his marriage today. He's losing control of the narrative he's built around that loss. For 3 years, he's been a sympathetic figure, the devoted husband trapped in a childless marriage through no fault of his own. Now, watching Sarah glow with the pregnancy he convinced himself she could never achieve, that story crumbles to reveal something much more complicated and much more damning. The whispers from both families grow more pointed as the day progresses. Michael's side speculates about affairs and deception, while Sarah's family radiates the quiet satisfaction of people who've been waiting for vindication. The courthouse corridor buzzes with fragments of conversation during each brief recess, as extended family members and friends try to piece together a timeline that makes sense of Sarah's condition. But through it all, Sarah herself remains serene, untouchable, protected by a certainty that Michael envies and fears in equal measure. She knows something he doesn't, something that gives her the strength to sit in that courtroom and weather the storm of speculation and judgment without flinching. As the afternoon shadows lengthen across the courthouse floor, Michael realizes that this day won't end with the clean resolution he'd expected. Instead, it will end with more questions and answers, more complexity than clarity, more reasons to doubt everything he thought he knew about himself and his marriage. The mysterious man in the back row continues to watch the proceedings with quiet intensity, and Michael finds himself obsessing over every detail of his appearance, every gesture, every moment of eye contact with Sarah. Is this her new partner? The father of her child? The man who gave her everything Michael couldn't? The financial discussions drag on: division of retirement accounts, mortgage responsibilities, credit card debts accumulated during their final desperate attempts at fertility treatments. Each line item represents a fragment of their shared life, a reminder of dreams they pursued together before those dreams became sources of conflict and resentment. Michael remembers writing checks for procedures that promised hope, but delivered disappointment month after month, year after year. He remembers the mounting stress, the way their conversations became focused entirely on ovulation schedules and hormone levels and statistics that seemed to mock their efforts at every turn. Had he been so focused on the mechanics of conception that he'd lost sight of the woman he'd married? Had his desperation for children overshadowed his love for Sarah herself? The questions multiply in his mind like a virus, infecting every memory he thought was settled and understood. By the time Judge Reeves announces the end of the day's session, Michael feels like he's been emotionally flayed. Nothing has been resolved. The divorce proceedings will continue tomorrow, but now with the added complexity of Sarah's pregnancy hanging over every decision, every negotiation, every moment of what he'd hoped would be a simple legal conclusion to their failed marriage. As people begin to file out of the courtroom, Sarah rises from her chair with that same graceful movement that emphasizes her condition. The mysterious man from the back row approaches her, offering his arm for support, and Michael watches them leave together with a growing sense that he's witnessing the end of one story and the beginning of another, a story in which he's no longer the central character. The Harrison family gathers around Michael in the emptying courtroom, voices raised in urgent discussion about next steps, legal strategies, and damage control. But Michael barely hears them. He's watching Sarah disappear through the courthouse doors, carrying with her all the answers to questions he's only just beginning to know how to ask. Tomorrow, the divorce proceedings will resume. Tomorrow, there will be more testimony, more negotiations, more legal maneuvering around the dissolution of their marriage. But tonight, Michael will go home to his empty apartment and confront the possibility that everything he thought he knew about the most important relationship of his life was built on assumptions that were not just wrong, but catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. The truth, Sarah had said, has a way of coming out whether we're ready for it or not. Michael is beginning to understand that he's not ready. But ready or not, tomorrow will bring more revelations, more complications, more opportunities for his carefully constructed understanding of himself to crumble completely. And somewhere in the city, Sarah's carrying a child who may hold the key to rewriting everything Michael thought he knew about love, loss, and the price of pride. Should she reveal the truth now, or let him drown in his assumptions? The second day of proceedings begins with the kind of tension that makes the air itself feel thick and oppressive. Word is spread overnight about Sarah's shocking appearance, and the courthouse corridors buzz with whispered speculation that transforms a routine divorce into the kind of public drama that draws crowds. Michael arrives early, hoping to intercept Sarah before the formal session begins, but she's already seated at the defendant's table when he enters the courtroom. She wears a different dress today, a flowing navy blue that somehow makes her pregnancy even more pronounced, and the mysterious man from yesterday sits in the front row directly behind her, his presence both protective and proprietary. The Harrison family has rallied overnight, and Michael's mother arrives with reinforcements. His Aunt Patricia, his cousin David, and family friend Margaret Walsh, who's never been one to shy away from other people's business. They fill the first three rows like an army preparing for battle, their unified front of disapproval and righteous indignation, making it clear they've spent the evening crafting a narrative that protects Michael's reputation at Sarah's expense. Eleanor Harrison wastes no time establishing her position. As the courtroom fills, her voice carries the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and believed. "That woman," she says to Margaret Walsh, her stage whisper designed to reach Sarah's family across the aisle, "has clearly been carrying on with another man. There's no other explanation for her condition. Michael tried everything to have children with her. Everything. The doctor said she was barren. The word barren hangs in the air like a weapon, and Michael sees Sarah's shoulders tense slightly at the sound of it. It's a term that's been used to define her for so long that it's become part of her identity in everyone's minds, including, Michael realizes with a growing sense of shame, his own. Sarah's family responds with their own show of strength. Her brother David has brought his wife Elena and their 2 teenage children, creating a visible reminder that Sarah comes from a family that knows how to create and sustain life. Her parents sit with the dignity of people who weather harder storms than courthouse gossip, but there's steel in their silence that speaks of years of watching their daughter blamed for circumstances beyond her control. The mysterious man, Michael has started thinking of him as the stranger, maintains his position behind Sarah with the quiet confidence of someone who belongs there. He's well-dressed without being flashy, probably a professional of some kind, and he carries himself with the bearing of a man who's comfortable in difficult situations. When he leans forward to whisper something to Sarah, she nods and smiles slightly, the first genuine smile Michael has seen from her in years. The intimacy of that moment hits Michael like a physical blow. When was the last time he'd made Sarah smile like that? When had he last been a source of comfort rather than stress in her life? Judge Reeves enters with the weariness of someone who's realized that what she'd hoped would be a straightforward case has become something far more complicated. She's clearly done her homework overnight. There are additional files on her desk, and her law clerk has a look of someone who's been researching precedents for unusual circumstances. Before we continue with asset division, Judge Reeves begins, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Mrs. Santos Harrison's pregnancy raises questions about potential child support obligations, custody considerations, and other matters that weren't part of our original proceedings. Sarah's lawyer, Maria Valdez, rises smoothly. Your Honor, my client's pregnancy doesn't change the fundamental nature of these proceedings. Mr. Harrison filed for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, and those differences remain regardless of my client's current condition. But surely, interrupts Michael's lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, if there's a possibility that Mr. Harrison is the father of the child in question, we need to establish paternity before finalizing any agreements. The word paternity ricochets around the courtroom like a gunshot. This is a question everyone has been thinking, but no one has been willing to voice directly. Now it hangs in the official court record, demanding an answer that could change everything. Sarah looks directly at Michael for the first time today, and in her eyes he sees something that makes his blood run cold. It's not anger or hurt or even disappointment. It's pity. She's looking at him like she feels sorry for him, like he's a child who doesn't understand the game being played around him. Your Honor, Sarah says, rising from her chair with careful dignity, I'm prepared to provide any medical documentation the court requires regarding my pregnancy. However, I want to make it clear that regardless of paternity, I expect nothing from Mr. Harrison. No support, no involvement, no acknowledgement. This child will be raised without any connection to him or his family. The words hit the courtroom like a bomb. Eleanor Harrison's face goes white, then red, then white again. The finality in Sarah's voice, the complete dismissal of any future relationship between her child and the Harrison family, transforms what might have been a complicated custody situation into something else entirely. A complete severing of ties that goes beyond legal divorce into emotional annihilation. She can't do that, Eleanor whispers urgently to Michael. If that's your child, she can't just cut us out completely. But Michael is beginning to understand that Sarah can do exactly that. She's not here seeking support or involvement or acknowledgement. She's here to end their connection permanently and completely, to build a wall so high and strong that neither he nor his family will ever be able to reach her or her child again. The realization should bring relief, freedom from obligation, from complication, from the mess that his marriage has become. Instead, it fills him with a panic he doesn't fully understand. The possibility of losing access to this child, this life that might be his, creates a desperation he never felt during all their years of trying to conceive. We demand paternity tests, Pierce declares, his voice carrying the authority of someone playing his strongest card. On what grounds? Valdez responds immediately. My client has made no claims regarding paternity, has requested no support, and has indicated no desire for any ongoing relationship with your client. What legal standing do you have to demand medical information about her pregnancy? Judge Reeves looks between the lawyers, clearly uncomfortable with the direction proceedings have taken. This is highly unusual, she admits. In most cases, paternity questions arise because of support claims or custody disputes. If Mrs. Santos Harrison is explicitly waiving any claims and requesting no involvement from Mr. Harrison, then Then he has no rights. Valdez finishes smoothly. No standing to demand information. No basis for forcing medical tests. No legal interest in my client's pregnancy whatsoever. The legal trap snaps shut around Michael with the precision of a Swiss watch. By demanding his freedom so completely, by refusing to claim any connection to Sarah's child, he's inadvertently surrendered any right to know whether that child is his. The very divorce he's pursued so aggressively has cut him off from the possibility of fatherhood he's been seeking. But Sarah isn't finished. She rises again, and this time there's something different in her bearing. A resolve that suggests she's been building toward this moment for a long time. Your Honor, I'd like to address the accusations that have been made about my character and my marriage. Her voice is clear and strong, cutting through the courtroom's tension like a blade. For 3 years, I've remained silent about the circumstances that led to the breakdown of my marriage. I've allowed myself to be characterized as barren, as somehow deficient, as the reason my husband and I couldn't have children. Michael's heart starts pounding. There's something in Sarah's tone that suggests she's about to reveal truths that will change everything, and he's not sure he's prepared to hear them. But silence serves no one when protects lies, Sarah continues. And the truth is that our fertility problems were never exclusively mine. The courtroom falls dead silent. Even Judge Reeves leans forward, recognizing that they're approaching the heart of whatever drama has been building around this case. 3 months after our separation began, Sarah says, her voice steady but gaining power with each word, I sought a second opinion from fertility specialists who had been recommended by a friend, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison at the Reproductive Health Institute. I wanted to understand my body better, to know what my options might be for the future. Michael feels like he's watching a car accident in slow motion, helpless to look away as Sarah destroys everything he thought he knew about their marriage. Dr. Morrison reviewed all my previous test results and medical history. She also recommended that I undergo a complete hormonal panel and genetic screening that hadn't been done during my original fertility workup. The results were illuminating. Sarah pauses, and in that silence Michael can hear his own heartbeat, can feel the weight of every person in the courtroom holding their breath. I was never barren, Sarah says simply. My fertility was completely normal. The previous diagnosis had been based on incomplete testing and assumptions that weren't supported by comprehensive analysis. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. If Sarah's fertility was normal, if she was never a problem, then everything, every argument, every accusation, every moment of blame and resentment had been built on lies. Eleanor Harrison's voice cuts through the stunned silence like a knife. That's impossible. The doctor said what they were told. Sarah interrupts, her composure finally cracking to reveal years of suppressed anger. They made assumptions based on the fact that I was the one showing up to appointments, asking questions, seeking help. They never questioned whether the problem might be more complex than they initially thought. Michael's world tilts on its axis. The implications of what Sarah is saying, that he might have been the primary source of their fertility problems, that he'd spent years blaming her for his own medical issues, make him feel sick with shame and self-loathing. But Sarah still isn't finished. Dr. Morrison recommended that any future partners undergo comprehensive fertility testing as well. She continues, her voice gaining strength as she finally tells the truth she's been carrying alone for 3 years. She explained that male factor infertility is often underdiagnosed because men are less likely to seek testing, less likely to acknowledge that the problem might be theirs. The courtroom erupts into chaos. Eleanor Harrison is on her feet, shouting denials and accusations. Sarah's family is rising in support, voices raised in vindication, after years of watching their daughter blamed for circumstances beyond her control. The mysterious man behind Sarah reaches forward to touch her shoulder, offering silent support as she weathers the storm she's unleashed. Judge Reeves pounds her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order proceedings that have spiraled completely out of control. Order in this courtroom. Michael sits frozen in his chair, drowning in the implications of Sarah's revelations. If he was the primary source of their fertility problems, if his pride and assumptions had prevented proper diagnosis and treatment, then he wasn't just a failed husband. He was the architect of their marriage's destruction. And now Sarah sits before him, pregnant and glowing, carrying life that might be his or might belong to a man who was brave enough to get properly tested, who was humble enough to acknowledge that fertility is a complex dance between two bodies, not the sole responsibility of the woman. The chaos in the courtroom continues, but Michael barely hears it. He's lost in a spiral of memories recontextualized by Sarah's revelations. Every fight they had about children, every cruel word he'd spoken in frustration, every moment he'd looked at her with disappointment instead of compassion. As Judge Reeves finally restores order and calls for another recess, Michael realizes that this isn't just the end of his marriage anymore. It's the moment when everything he thought he knew about himself, his choices, and his character reveals itself to be built on lies he'd been too proud to question. And sitting 20 feet away, Sarah glows with a pregnancy he'd convinced himself she could never achieve, proof that the problem was never her body or her failure as a woman. The problem was a marriage poisoned by assumptions, pride, and a man too arrogant to consider that he might be the broken one. If you were the judge, would you demand the truth immediately or protect her privacy? The emergency recess stretches into an hour as courthouse security works to calm the chaos that erupted after Sarah's bombshell revelation. The corridor outside the courtroom resembles a war zone, with both families huddled in separate camps, voices raised in heated discussion that echoes off the marble walls like artillery fire. Michael finds himself isolated even among his own supporters. His mother paces frantically near the water fountain, her voice sharp with panic as she tries to maintain the narrative that has sustained their family's sense of superiority for 3 years. She's lying. Eleanor Harrison insists to anyone who will listen. This is all some elaborate scheme to make Michael look bad. You don't just discover after 3 years that you were never barren. That's not how medicine works. But Margaret Walsh, the family friend who'd arrived as reinforcement, has gone quiet. As a retired nurse, she knows enough about fertility medicine to recognize the uncomfortable possibility that Sarah might be telling the truth. Male factor infertility is indeed underdiagnosed, particularly when cultural assumptions lead doctors to focus primarily on the woman's reproductive capacity. Jennifer Harrison, Michael's sister, approaches him with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. "Michael," she says quietly, "is there any chance, did you ever get fully tested? I mean, really comprehensive testing." The question hits Michael like ice water because he knows the answer. He'd undergone basic sperm analysis early in their fertility journey, tests that showed normal counts and motility. But comprehensive male fertility evaluation include hormone panels, genetic screening, advanced sperm function tests, procedures his doctor had mentioned but never insisted upon when the initial results seemed adequate. The basic tests were fine, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. Dr. Peterson said my numbers were normal. "Basic tests," Jennifer repeats, and in her tone Michael hears a dawning realization that basic might not have been sufficient. Across the corridor, Sarah's family radiates a different energy entirely, where the Harrisons project defensive panic. The Santos family embodies quiet vindication. They spent 3 years watching their daughter accept blame for fertility problems that may never have been hers to bear. Maria Santos still clutches her rosary beads, but now her prayers carry the weight of gratitude rather than desperation. The mysterious man, Michael has learned from overheard conversations that his name is Dr. James Rivera, stands slightly apart from Sarah's immediate family, but clearly within their circle of acceptance. He's a pediatric cardiologist. According to the whispers, someone Sarah met through her work at the hospital where she returned as a nurse after their separation. The professional connection explains his presence, but not the intimate way he supports Sarah through this ordeal, the way she looks to him for strength when the pressure becomes overwhelming. Michael finds himself studying every interaction between them, searching for clues about the nature of their relationship, and, more importantly, whether Dr. Rivera might be the father of Sarah's child. Judge Reeves finally recalls the court to session, her face grim with the expression of someone who's realized that her courtroom has become the stage for a human drama that far exceeds the typical scope of divorce proceedings. She's consulted with her law clerk during the recess, and additional legal precedents now sit on her bench, evidence that she's prepared for whatever revelations might come next. Given the serious allegations raised during our previous session, Judge Reeves begins, her voice carrying new authority. "I'm going to make an unusual ruling. This court is prepared to order comprehensive medical testing for all relevant parties to establish the facts that seem to be in dispute." Michael's lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, rises immediately. "Your Honor, my client supports any testing that would clarify these matters. We have nothing to hide." Sarah's attorney, Maria Valdez, responds with measured caution. "Your Honor, my client has already provided extensive medical documentation supporting her statements. She's not seeking any support or involvement from Mr. Harrison, so the question of paternity, while personally significant, has no legal bearing on these divorce proceedings." Nevertheless, Judge Reeves replies firmly, "When allegations of medical misdiagnosis and questions of paternity arise in my courtroom, I have the authority to order testing in the interest of establishing truth. Mrs. Santos Harrison, are you prepared to submit to paternity testing?" Sarah rises slowly, her hand moving to rest on her belly in that protective gesture that's become her signature. "Your Honor, I'm prepared to submit to any testing the court requires. But I want it clearly stated in the record that regardless of the results, I seek no support, no involvement, and no ongoing relationship with Mr. Harrison. This testing is for legal clarity only. So noted, Judge Reeves replies. Mr. Harrison, are you prepared to submit to comprehensive fertility testing and paternity determination? Michael feels the weight of the entire courtroom's attention focused on him. This is the moment of truth, literally and figuratively. He can refuse, can maintain his privacy and his assumptions, can let the divorce proceed without confronting the medical realities that might destroy everything he's believed about himself and his marriage. Or he can finally face the possibility that he's been wrong about everything. Yes, Your Honor, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll submit to whatever testing is required. The words feel like stepping off a cliff into free fall. For 3 years, Michael has built his identity around being the victim of Sarah's medical limitations. Now he's agreed to testing that might prove he was the primary obstacle to the children they both desperately wanted. Judge Reeves nods grimly. The court will arrange for expedited testing through the medical examiner's office. Results will be sealed and shared only with the parties involved and their legal counsel. We'll reconvene in 48 hours to review the findings. 48 hours. 2 days for Michael's entire understanding of himself to potentially crumble completely. As the court prepares to adjourn, Sarah's phone buzzes with what appears to be an urgent message. She glances at the screen, and her face goes pale beneath her pregnancy glow. Dr. Rivera leans forward immediately, concern evident in his posture as she whispers something to him. Your Honor, Sarah's voice cuts through procedural discussions with new urgency. I need to request immediate recess. I'm experiencing some discomfort that requires medical attention. The word discomfort sends a ripple alarm through both families. Pregnancy complications, stress-induced medical emergencies, the possibility that the emotional trauma of these proceedings might be affecting her health and her baby's well-being. Suddenly, the legal battle takes on life and death stakes. Dr. Rivera is already moving, his medical training evident in the way he assesses Sarah's condition with professional efficiency while maintaining the gentle support of someone who cares deeply about her well-being. We need to get you to the hospital, he says quietly, but his words carry clearly in the hushed courtroom. Michael finds himself on his feet without conscious decision, instinct overriding 3 years of legal separation. Sarah, are you? She's fine, Dr. Rivera interrupts firmly, his voice carrying the authority of medical expertise and personal protection. But she needs immediate evaluation. Stress can cause complications, especially in the third trimester. Third trimester. The words hit Michael like a physical blow because they establish a timeline that makes his head spin with calculations. If Sarah is in her third trimester, if this pregnancy is approximately 6 to 7 months along, then conception occurred. The math is devastating in its simplicity. 6 months ago, Michael was still married to Sarah. They were separated but not yet divorced, still legally bound to each other even as they lived apart and rebuilt their lives independently. 6 months ago, Michael was dating his current girlfriend, telling her stories about his barren ex-wife and their failed marriage, while Sarah was apparently discovering that her fertility had never been the problem. If this baby is his, if Sarah conceived during some forgotten moment of connection during their separation period, then he's not just a failed husband. He's a man who abandoned his pregnant wife without ever knowing she was carrying his child. But if the baby belongs to Dr. Rivera or some other partner Sarah found after their separation, then the timeline still points to her remarkable fertility, her ability to conceive easily once she was free from the stress and toxicity of their failing marriage. Either possibility destroys the narrative Michael has used to justify his choices over the past 3 years. Sarah rises carefully from her chair, Dr. Rivera's hand steadying her elbow. As they move toward the courtroom exit, she pauses and looks directly at Michael for what might be the last time before the test results change everything between them. You wanted the truth, she says quietly, her voice cutting to the courtroom's anxious silence. In 48 hours, you'll have it. I hope you're prepared for what that truth might cost you. The words hang in the air like a prophecy as Sarah and Dr. Rivera disappear through the courthouse doors, leaving behind a courtroom full of people who suddenly understand that they're witnessing more than a divorce proceeding. They're watching complete destruction and reconstruction of a man's understanding of himself, his choices, and the price of pride that refuses to acknowledge its own limitations. Eleanor Harrison sinks into her seat, the fight gone out of her as she confronts the possibility that her son might be the father of a grandchild she'll never know, carried by a woman she spent 3 years demonizing. The Harrison family's united front begins to crack as individual members start questioning their own assumptions and allegiances. Michael stands alone in the chaos, surrounded by people but completely isolated in his growing understanding of what the next 48 hours might reveal. The test results will establish paternity, but they'll also expose a medical truth about fertility, his role in their childless marriage, and his responsibility for the pain that drove Sarah away. As the courtroom slowly empties, Michael realizes that he's not just waiting for test results. He's waiting for judgment, medical, legal, and moral, that will determine not just the outcome of his divorce, but the kind of man he'll have to live with being for the rest of his life. The truth, Sarah had warned him, has a way of coming out whether we're ready for it or not. Michael is beginning to understand that he's not ready at all. If you were her, would you forgive him, or let him live with his guilt forever? The 48 hours pass like a suspended sentence. Michael moves through his daily routine like a ghost, unable to concentrate on work, unable to sleep, unable to escape the growing certainty that the test results will confirm his worst fears about himself and his marriage to Sarah. His apartment, the bachelor pad he'd furnished with such optimism 18 months ago, now feels like a prison. Every room reminds him of the future he'd planned, the freedom he'd sought, the new life he'd intended to build once he was free from what he convinced himself was a barren marriage. The modern furniture, the expensive electronics, the carefully curated space that was supposed to represent his liberation now mock him with their emptiness. He's supposed to meet his girlfriend Lisa for dinner tonight, but he can't bring himself to face her questions about the divorce proceedings. Lisa is 28, ambitious, fertile in that effortless way that young women often are. She's already talking about their future together, about the children they'll have once Michael is legally free to remarry. The irony of her expectations, given what Michael now suspects about his own fertility, would be laughable if it weren't so devastating. The call comes at 2:17 p.m. on the second day. Judge Reeves' clerk delivers the message with professional neutrality. The test results are available, and court will reconvene at 4 p.m. for final proceedings. Michael arrives at the courthouse 30 minutes early, but Sarah's already there, seated at her usual table with Dr. Rivera beside her in the gallery. She looks rested despite the medical scare 2 days ago, her pregnancy glow undimmed by the stress of impending revelation. There's something different about her posture, though, a sense of completion, as if she's finally approaching the end of a journey she's been traveling alone for too long. The sealed envelope on Judge Reeves' desk seems to pulse with significance, containing information that will rewrite the story of Michael's marriage, his identity as a man, and his responsibility for the failure that brought them all to this courtroom. Judge Reeves enters with the gravity of someone about to deliver news that will change lives irrevocably. She's seen the results, obviously, and her expression carries the weight of truths that are both medically clear and morally complex. The court has received the results of paternity testing and comprehensive fertility evaluation ordered during our previous session. She begins, her voice carefully neutral. I want to remind everyone present that these are private medical matters being disclosed only because of their relevance to the legal proceedings before us. Michael's heart pounds so hard, he's certain everyone in the courtroom can hear it. His hands shake as he grips the arms of his chair, preparing for revelations that might destroy everything he's believed about himself. The paternity test results are conclusive. Judge Reeves continues, opening the sealed envelope with deliberate care. Mr. Michael Harrison is the biological father of the child carried by Mrs. Sarah Santos Harrison. The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Eleanor Harrison gasps audibly, her carefully constructed narrative about Sarah's infidelity crumbling in an instant. Sarah's family exchanges looks of validation mixed with sadness. Vindication for their daughter, but at the cost of exposing painful truths about a marriage that never should have failed so completely. But Judge Reeves isn't finished. The comprehensive fertility evaluation reveals additional information relevant to the dissolution of this marriage. She continues, her voice growing more serious. Mr. Harrison's fertility testing indicates severe oligospermia, extremely low sperm count, combined with poor motility and morphology. These conditions would make natural conception difficult under best circumstances and nearly impossible under stress. Michael feels like he's drowning in plain sight. The medical terms wash over him like waves, each one confirming what he's begun to suspect and fear. He was the primary source of their fertility problems. His basic sperm count had been within normal ranges, but normal count means nothing when motility is poor or morphology is compromised. The comprehensive testing he'd never undergone would have revealed problems that simple count analysis missed entirely. Furthermore, Judge Reeves continues relentlessly, the medical evaluation indicates that Mrs. Santos Harrison's fertility has always been completely normal. Previous diagnoses suggesting otherwise appear to have been based on incomplete testing and unfounded assumptions. The courtroom falls into stunned silence as the full implications become clear. Sarah had never been barren. Michael's fertility issues had been the primary obstacle to conception throughout their marriage. And now, somehow miraculously, Sarah's carrying his child, conceived during a period when they were separated, when the stress of their failing marriage had been removed from the equation. Michael's mind races through the timeline, trying to identify when conception might have occurred. 6 months ago, there had been one night, just one, when Sarah had come to collect some belongings from their shared home. They had talked for hours about their relationship, their dreams, their regrets. It had been the most honest conversation they'd had in years, and it had led to... He remembers that night now with devastating clarity. It hadn't been passion or romance that brought them together, but a kind of grief for what they were losing. They'd made love like people saying goodbye, with the tenderness of shared sorrow and the desperation of knowing it was the last time. Sarah had left the next morning before he woke up, and they'd never spoken of that night again. He convinced himself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness that didn't change anything about their need to divorce. He'd never imagined it might have created the life they'd wanted for so many years. Mrs. Santos Harrison, Judge Reeves addresses Sarah directly. Given these results, does this information change your position regarding Mr. Harrison's involvement in your child's life? Sarah rises slowly, her hand resting on her belly. When she speaks, her voice carries the strength of someone who's found peace with difficult truths. Your Honor, learning that Michael is my child's father doesn't change my position. I spent 3 years rebuilding my life, discovering my worth beyond my ability to bear children, and learning that I deserve better than a marriage built on blame and resentment. She pauses, looking directly at Michael for the first time since the results were announced. This child was conceived during a moment when we remembered how to be kind to each other. But one night of kindness doesn't erase 3 years of cruelty. The words hit Michael like physical blows. Sarah's assessment of their marriage, that it had been built on blame and resentment, that he'd been cruel rather than supportive during their fertility struggles, forces him to confront the husband he'd actually been rather than the victim he believed himself to be. However, Sarah continues, and there's something different in her tone now. I recognize that this child deserves to know their father's medical history, to understand their genetic heritage, and have the option of a relationship with paternal relatives if they choose when they're old enough to make that decision. She's offering him something. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a chance to be part of his child's life in some limited capacity. It's more than he deserves, more than his treatment of her has earned, and the generosity of it makes him feel smaller than he's ever felt in his life. Judge Reeves nods approvingly. The court finds these to be reasonable terms. Mr. Harrison, you are legally obligated to provide child support as determined by state guidelines. Regarding visitation and parental rights, those can be negotiated separately through family mediation services. Child support, parental rights. The legal framework of fatherhood without the emotional connection he'd always imagined. Michael will pay for his child's upbringing, but he'll do so as an outsider to the family Sarah is building with Dr. Rivera, who's clearly positioned to be the father figure this child will actually know and love. The divorce proceeds quickly after that, the asset division and final paperwork handled with efficient professionalism now that the underlying drama has been resolved. Michael signs documents that end his marriage while simultaneously establishing his legal relationship to a child he helped create but will likely never really know. As the gavel falls and Judge Reeves pronounces their marriage officially dissolved, Michael realizes that he's not just losing a wife today. He's losing the chance to be the father he'd always wanted to be, the opportunity to raise the child he dreamed of, the family he destroyed through his own pride and cruelty. Sarah gathers her belongings with the careful movements of someone in advanced pregnancy. Dr. Rivera helps her to her feet, and together they represent the future that might have been Michael's if he'd been capable of love without conditions, support without blame, partnership without the need to find fault when things didn't go according to plan. As they prepare to leave the courtroom, Sarah stops near Michael's table. For a moment, he thinks she might offer some final word, forgiveness, condemnation, or simply acknowledgement of the tragedy they've both survived. Instead, she places a small envelope on the table before him. Ultrasound photos, she says quietly. I thought you should see your child, even if... She doesn't finish the sentence, but she doesn't need to, even if you'll never really know them. Even if you destroyed any chance of being part of this miracle. Even if you spent 3 years blaming me for your own medical limitations. Michael picks up the envelope with trembling hands as Sarah walks away with Dr. Rivera, her family following behind like a protective convoy. She doesn't look back, doesn't offer any final gesture of reconciliation or condemnation. She simply leaves, carrying his child toward a future that no longer includes him in any meaningful way. The courthouse empties slowly, leaving Michael alone with his lawyer, his shattered family, and the envelope containing images of a child who will grow up knowing that their biological father was a man who abandoned their mother during the pregnancy he claimed to want more than anything else in the world. Eleanor Harrison approaches hesitantly, her earlier righteousness replaced by the deflated confusion of someone whose worldview has been completely overturned. "Michael," she begins, but there are no words of what happened, no way to rebuild a narrative that sustained their family's sense of superiority and victimhood. "I need to be alone," Michael says quietly, and for once in his life, his mother doesn't argue. He sits in the empty courtroom for nearly an hour, staring at the envelope he's afraid to open. When he finally finds the courage to look at the ultrasound images, he sees a perfect child, his child, floating in the safety of Sarah's body, growing healthy and strong despite the chaos and heartbreak surrounding their creation. The irony is devastating in its completeness. For 8 years, Michael blamed Sarah for their inability to have children. Now she carries his child, healthy and thriving, while he sits alone in an empty courtroom contemplating the wreckage of his pride, his marriage, and his chance at fatherhood. He thinks about Lisa, waiting for him to call and tell the divorce is final, expecting to celebrate the beginning of their life together. He'll have to explain that he's now the father of his ex-wife's child, that his fertility issues make their own family planning complicated, that everything he told her about his past was built on assumptions that proved to be catastrophically wrong. The truth, Sarah had warned him, has a way of coming out whether we're ready for it or not. The truth has revealed that he was never the victim of his marriage's failure. He was its architect. The truth has given him a child he may never know and destroyed any chance of the family he thought he wanted to build. As evening shadows lengthen across the courthouse floor, Michael finally stands to leave, carrying the ultrasound photos of his child and the crushing weight of understanding what his pride has cost him. He's legally free now, divorced and unencumbered. Exactly what he thought he wanted 18 months ago. But freedom, he's learning, can be the cruelest punishment of all when it means freedom from the people and possibilities that mattered most, lost through choices that can never be unmade and words that can never be taken back. Sarah drives away from the courthouse toward a future filled with love, support, and the child she'll raise with people who value her for who she is rather than what her body can provide. Michael drives toward an empty apartment in the long, lonely work of learning to live with the man he's discovered himself to be. The truth has set them both free, but only one of them is flying. Stories like this remind us that life is full of unexpected turns. If this one touched you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe now. It's free, and it helps keep these powerful stories alive. Do you believe he truly deserves a second chance, or has he already lost everything?